Continuing on the larger theme of globalization on individual countries and their responses as well, again, it's a two sided thing. It's globalization as an heavy influence, and the countries are still somewhat free to make choices. And a country which we are going to be looking at in particular to exemplify the way the globalization can become an asset to a country in its aspiration to become developed, we are going to be looking at China. So, this is China's political economy, and of course, initially, China's political economy was not one, or at least when we talk about recent Chinese political economy, I should, yeah, low check. China was once a great trading empire, right? A huge trading empire within Asia. But of course, with the choice for communism um, made China a country that was closed, it was very closed off from the global economy. And again, was also practicing capitalism, but was practicing strong, straight led communism. And that being said, as we have seen, Mao always wanted a little bit more of a grassroots sense of communism as compared to the strong communism in the Soviet Union, where Stalin and leaders such as that really pushed their policies, centralized policies from Moscow, pushed down on all of Russia and the entire Soviet Union. So that was Russia's style of communism. On the other hand, Mao at times, the man who lost his patience for sure, but was at times somebody who had a lot of faith, a lot of desire to create a little bit more of a democratic. I mean, when I say democratic, I don't mean being able to vote, but a system where people on ground level, especially peasants, would have a lot more input into policy. So it wasn't that central command style of communism. And again, example of this, which we already talked about in other context, economically, is this idea of great leap forward. Um, this idea where he wanted to decentralize the steel production, but of course, uh, he did it in a wrong way, allowing the peasants themselves to do this, which they had really no idea where the steel was going to go. No idea how to assess, learn where there was demand or anything like that. And a lot, instead they were producing a lot of sub-quality, useless steel, and to a degree that they were distracted from primary functions of being farmers, right? Of course, sharecroppers on these larger state-owned properties and food production took a secondary role for a short period of time, leading to tremendous famine as well. So somehow, someone's huge misstep through which millions of people lost their lives. So Great Leap Forward again was not a leap forward at all. Uh, Good awful later on um, attempt. It's a good later on of attempt, but it's not a leap forward. It's greatly forward happened in the late 1950s. So cultural revolution. It was not so much primarily an economic plan. Instead, it was this idea of trying to revitalize socialism, get people excited about socialism, especially the younger generation. And he basically promoted activists. I mean, Mao promoted activists, people who are loyal to party, to position of leadership, right? political leadership, but not only political leadership, but also the economic leadership, where they they were starting suddenly running companies and factories, even if they had no background at all in this kind of policy area. Now, that of course produced a lot of infighting, and not a lot of know-how, not a lot of know-how. So it was pretty unsuccessful, very unsuccessful. The only thing we can say is in the long run is that this did produce some industrial base. When we say industrial and technological base, meaning China went from an economy and an infrastructure that was like 18th century, like to know how a rudimentary 20th century economy that could, had harnessed electricity, which had lighted rooms, indoor plumbings, and those kind of things. So that is actually worked. Wasn't enough for China to become an economic power in the 1950s or in the 1960s. They were not producing anything that the rest of the world wanted, but it was enough for China, at least to the Chinese people, to get the bare minimum necessities. And as a result of this, not only was this good for bringing the country to a higher level of development, but we could see that through, the healthcare outcomes improving, uh, literacy increasing. We talked about this thing called iron rice bowl. And iron rice bowl again was this desire of the China state to make sure that every person had a minimal level of health care that they can rely on. But the standard of living, your ability to actually buy things for yourself and consumer goods still lagged far behind. What the West enjoyed, and certainly, maybe more importantly, what they could see closer up, what Japan had, right? For uh, this, of course, all changed with the death of Mao, you know, and not really until the death of Mao, at which time his old economic minister assumed control of the country. That was Deng, and Deng began a process of greater decentralization, of allowing a lot more decision to be made at um, what would we say at a more local level, and rather the decision than and rather than having Beijing or make the decision and the Communist Party make the decision about what to produce, this decentralized thing, he said, well, let's start letting like let's start letting, like as in capitalism, the market do this, and that means you need to go find what people want. What do people want to buy? What can I produce well enough, cheap enough that people will want to buy it both domestically, and then eventually also we become efficient enough that we can sell it to our people here and then maybe sell abroad, move on to a more export led growth. And it's the first thing was to introduce that aspect of capitalism, of letting price be uh, set by the market, and then letting factories themselves kind of choose what they would do. This, of course, meant that the ownership also was going to be transferred, and basically about 75% of what was all state-owned enterprise rather than private businesses, but state-owned enterprises were sold off, and now that has changed. The shape of the economy, the structure of the economy, that's no longer 80% owned by the Chinese government. Now only about 17% of what is made in China is made by the state-owned, state-operated businesses. Everything else, they're private companies. Private companies that contract out to Apple or for companies that stand on their own. In terms of agriculture, instead of having communes, we have something called household responsibility system, which is kind of a mixture where basically you still have property which is communally owned, right? Communally owned and a community, a town or such would be producing the agriculture products there, whatever it might be. But there is also the ability for individual to rent some of that property, uh, and produce on their own. And what this simply means is that part of your day is spent working for, centrally owned government that owns and centrally I mean not Beijing, but I'm talking about the local communal government. Your municipal government owns this. You produce for them, but then you are given part of the day off, and again you want to earn very little. You go home, you smoke your pipe, and you're quiet. On the other hand, if you want to succeed, you want to make more money, you rent some more property and you start producing some more on that land there, and that produce you make, and that result from that you go and sell at the market. You can sell back to your commune, but you get the money back for that. So again, the idea is encouraging you uh, want to take more responsibility for becoming more affluent if you want to. Similarly, the idea, the other economic unit is the township and village enterprise. This just simply means that in China, a lot of business that exists, right? So somebody is making boots, or somebody is making supply parts for cars, or something like that. Would be making this in a factory, um, a local factory that is not owned necessarily entirely private, but it is owned by municipality, by the local government, by the towns or villages. But they are largely free to make choice on their own. They are not being told by Beijing, "Hey, you produce widgets for us." No, they are free to scour the global markets, right? If they find out, oh my gosh, we went to a trade show in Europe, we make these tiny little plastic dinosaur toys. There they sell them for 50 cents per little dinosaur. We are able to produce those for 25 cents, right? They go around, they talk to people who are buying these things. They say, listen, we are a company in China. We can make these things kind of dinosaur for half price, like 25 cents instead of 50 cents. You know what? What's the going price here? So they go out, they seek the market niches. They do so on their own. In one sense, this has produced tremendous rural efficiency, and the businesses subscribing to capitalist principle tend to often do pretty well. And again, they are uh, they this also allows the municipalities to become a little bit more independent from the center. Here, center means Beijing. They are not getting so much money from the central government anymore. That doesn't matter because they are making money on their own. But sometimes it can be tremendously susceptible to a lot of corruption because the decision makers are still kind of politicians as well. And because these communities have become more efficient, Chinese government said, okay, if you guys can uh, take care of yourself, no more iron rice bowl, right? So they really lowered the level of healthcare and